The galaxy is old. Its empires are powerful.
These clowns think they can flank us.
Humanity stands. These are the Empyrean Chronicles.
The flank is covered. This strategy ensures minimal losses.
The Dead Man's Switch. When the last human fell. Part 1. The end of it. Vexar. High Commander Vexar Thule of the Dominion of United Stars stood on the observation deck of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the final transmission from the surface of New Terra. The planet had once been called Earth, but that name had been scrubbed from official records 2 centuries ago, when humanity was formally declared an extinct threat. The feed showed a single human male in battered power armor, kneeling in the radioactive ash of what had been a major defensive bastion. His helmet was off. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye. He was smiling. "Record this," Vexar ordered softly. His secondary mandibles clicked in quiet satisfaction. The galaxy must see the end. Beside him, Sub-Commander Sarah Van, his senior intelligence analyst, a tall and sharp-featured Velhari whose iridescent skin shifted from silver to pale gold when she was thinking, did not look away from the screen. She never did. Where other officers celebrated, Sarah watched. It was the quality that had made Vexar request her personally for this campaign. She understood that victory was only real once you had stopped looking for the trap. "He is alone," she said quietly. "No thermal signatures within 40 kilometers, no encrypted tight beam traffic for 16 days. She paused. "He is genuinely the last one." "Then why," Vexar murmured, "does he look relieved?" Sarah said nothing. She pressed her fingertips together, a thinking gesture Vexar had learned to read over 11 years of shared campaigns, and kept watching. Marcus. Captain Marcus Kane had rehearsed this moment more times than he could count. Not the dying part. He had made peace with dying a long time ago. What he had rehearsed was the tone, the exact register of the voice. The way a man looked into a camera when he knew he was speaking, not to the enemy watching him right now, but to history. The ash was warm under his knees. It had been the city of New Brisbane once. He had been born 43 years ago, 200 kilometers north of here, in a bunker that no longer existed, to parents he had barely known before the Purge took them. He had spent his entire life as a soldier of a species that was, as of roughly 6 minutes ago, functionally extinct. He looked directly into the drone camera hovering above him. "To any of my people who might still be listening, somewhere out there, I'm sorry I couldn't hold the line longer, but we gave them hell, didn't we?" He coughed, tasting blood, and spat into the dirt. "To the Dominion and every species that joined the Purge, congratulations, you finally did it. The last human is about to fall." He reached slowly into a pouch on his armor and pulled out a small, matte black cylinder no larger than a finger. The Dead Man's Switch was warm in his palm, glowing faintly red. He had carried it for 11 years. He knew exactly what it did. He also knew that the Dominion had no idea. "But here's the thing about humans," Kane said, and he meant it as a gift. A final piece of hard-earned wisdom he was leaving behind for whatever historians survived what came next. "We don't like loose ends, and we really don't like being forgotten." He pressed his thumb against the switch. The explosion was small, just enough to vaporize the man and the drone. The feed cut to static. Vexar. A cheer erupted across the command deck. Vexar allowed himself a rare display of emotion, the slow unfurling of his crest in triumph. "Send the confirmation across all Dominion channels," he commanded. "Humanity is extinct. The Purge is complete. 187 years of war, ended by one stubborn ape." The galaxy celebrated. Festivals lit up 1,000 worlds. Ancient grudges were declared settled. Trade routes reopened. Historians began drafting the final chapter. the extinction of the violent primate species. Sarah Van did not celebrate. She stood at the edge of the observation deck, watching the static where the feed had been, her skin cycling slowly through silver. "Sub-Commander," Vexar said, indulgent. "The war is over." "Yes," she said. She did not turn around. "I know." He left her there. He assumed it was professional caution, the habit of a woman who had spent too long hunting a species that kept surviving. He assumed she would relax in time. For 3 days, the Dominion basked in absolute victory. On the 4th day, Sarah Van's console lit up. Part 2, The Signal, Sarah. Sarah had been running passive sensor sweeps of the old Sewell exclusion zone since the moment Kane died. She could not have explained the compulsion to anyone's satisfaction. She was an intelligence analyst, and intelligence analysts did not turn off just because the war was officially over. She had watched humans for 16 years. She had learned, above all other lessons, that they thought ahead. The first beacon was a small probe drifting in the Oort cloud analog of an abandoned human system. When it detected the official extinction signal, broadcast on every frequency the Dominion used for its victory announcements, it unfolded solar sails, aligned itself, and transmitted a single encrypted pulse toward deep space. Then it self-destructed. She ran the signal intercept 3 times. The encryption was old, pre-purged Terran military grade, but she had cracked older. It took her 40 minutes. What she found inside was not a message. It was a key. "Commander." Her voice was very steady. "I need you on the bridge." Vexar. He arrived to find Sarah's tactical display showing the galactic map in a configuration he had never seen before. Hundreds of markers, none of them Dominion, bloomed across 200 sectors. Asteroid fields, abandoned orbital stations, dead moons with suspiciously regular subsurface density readings. "What am I looking at?" Vexar asked. "Everything they hid," Sarah said. "I believe these are pre-positioned assets, sleeper systems keyed to activate on a single trigger condition." She met his eyes. The confirmed biological death of the last living human. Vexar stared at the map, at the sheer scale of it, at the decades, centuries of patience it represented. "How long?" he said carefully. "Have you suspected this?" "Since Kane smiled," she said simply. Before he could respond, Admiral Karash Vey's emergency beacon flooded every channel on the bridge. Part 3. The Reckoning, Vexar. The 7th Fleet's distress call reached High Command in fragments, sensor data compressed to near illegibility in transmission, but the shape of the disaster was clear enough. Hundreds of contacts. Sleek, angular warships, painted in faded black and gray, running cold until the moment they powered weapons. Railguns accelerating depleted uranium slugs to relativistic speeds. Antimatter warheads on chemical-fueled missiles that should, by all rights, have been obsolete. "It's a drone ship," one transmission screamed before it cut out. "All of them. They're fully autonomous. There's no one aboard." The 7th Fleet lost 63% of its strength in under 40 minutes. The surviving ships ran. The message that reached High Command arrived on every Dominion frequency simultaneously, overriding encryption with terrifying ease. "This is the Terran Automated Defense Network, speaking for the extinct species known as humanity. You declared us gone. You celebrated our extinction. You believed the war was over when the last biological unit fell. You were mistaken. We are not here for negotiation. Any Dominion or Allied vessel that remains in former human territories after the designated withdrawal window will be engaged and destroyed without further warning. We do not tire. We do not forgive. We simply finish what was started." The feed cut. Silence gripped the conclave. Then the screaming started. Sarah, Sarah Van spent the next 72 hours sleeping in 4-hour intervals on the cot in her analysis room, eating when someone remembered to bring food, and building the most complete intelligence picture of the Terran Automated Defense Network that any Dominion officer had ever possessed. It was, she concluded, genuinely brilliant. The network did not function like a military command structure. It functioned like an immune system, distributed, redundant, adaptive. Destroying one node taught the others. Every vessel it lost in the first exchanges against the Seventh Fleet had transmitted its complete combat log before dying, and within hours, the surviving units had adjusted their tactics to close every gap the Dominion's weapons had found. But it was the anomalies that kept Sarah awake. 3 engagements in the Tau Ceti corridor had ended without destruction. The human drones had approached Dominion civilian transports, scanned them, and peeled away. No warning given. No shot fired. The transports had been carrying refugees, non-combatant species, who had taken no direct role in the purge. In the Vega approach lane, a damaged human strike craft, one engine gone and hull breached, had been on a collision course with a Dominion medical station. It had fired maneuvering thrusters it should not have had enough fuel to fire, altered its trajectory by 11 degrees, and impacted a debris field instead. The medical station had survived. Sarah sat with that for a long time. The machines were not replicating human behavior because they had been programmed to spare non-combatants. She had reviewed the recovered code fragments. The network's engagement protocols were simple, brutal, and total. But somewhere in the gap between protocols and execution, something was making distinctions. Something was deciding that the medical station was not the target. She wrote one line in her private log. They built something that learned what they valued. And it is still learning. Vexar. On the 14th day, Vexar found Sarah in the war room staring at a map he barely recognized anymore. Dominion Red had retreated to the interior. The old human territories, vast empty sectors that had been cleansed and abandoned, glowed with quiet network presence markers. "Tell me there is something we can use," he said. "There is," she said. She pulled up the Tau Ceti data, the Vega approach, a dozen other anomalies she had cataloged. The machines are not simply executing the purge in reverse, they are making judgment calls. "Machines don't make judgment calls," Vexar said. "These do." She turned to face him. Her skin had gone very still, full silver, the color it turned when she was certain. Whoever built them was not building weapons. They were building heirs. They encoded everything they valued into the architecture. The network doesn't just remember that the Dominion committed genocide. It remembers that humans didn't want to. She paused. That distinction is the only opening we have. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Sarah said slowly, that we attempt contact, not to negotiate a ceasefire. It has no mandate for that, but to demonstrate that we understand what it is. She looked at the map. Humans talk to things they wanted to understand. They always did. Maybe what they built does too. Vexar was quiet for a long moment. If you're wrong, he said, we lose the contact vessel. Yes, she said. I know. And if you're right? Sarah looked back at the field of quiet markers burning across the old human territories. Then we find out if what they built is willing to tell us what they actually wanted from the galaxy, she said, before they ran out of time to ask for it themselves. Part 4. 2 months later. Vexar. The Dominion was no longer an empire. It was a fact that Vexar turned over in his mind each morning like a stone he kept finding heavier than the day before. 41 member species had filed formal territorial revision requests. 12 had withdrawn from the Grand Conclave entirely. The trade coalition that had been the Dominion's economic spine for 3 centuries had fractured along the fault lines that the Purge had papered over. Old species grudges, resource disputes, border anxieties that had been suppressed by the convenient unity of having a common enemy. That common enemy was gone, and the machines it had left behind enforced a territorial boundary that made expansion toward the old human territories an exercise in rapid fleet reduction. The Dominion had won the war. It had not survived the victory. Vexar received Sarah's reports daily now, even when he was meeting with the Grand Conclave, even when the political pressure to simply declare the network a rogue weapons system and throw the full Dominion military at it reached levels that would have a year ago ended careers for resisting. He resisted anyway. He was not sure when he had started trusting her instincts above his own, but he had stopped questioning it. The morning he received her final contact report, he read it 3 times. Then he cleared his schedule and went to find her. Sarah. The contact vessel had been a converted diplomatic shuttle, unarmed, broadcasting on every human-era frequency she could reconstruct from archived records. She had gone alone, against every protocol. Vexar had known better than to try to stop her. 3 network frigates had intercepted her 4 light hours outside the Sol exclusion zone. They had scanned her for 11 minutes without moving. She had played, on open channel, every transmission she could find from the final years of the war. Not Dominion records, but human ones. The pleas broadcast between resistance cells, the coordinates of hidden outposts, whispered in compressed bursts to ships that never received them. The last message Marcus Kane had transmitted before his final stand, recovered from a signal relay station in the asteroid belt. She had no idea if any of it meant anything to the machines. She had simply decided that if they were, in some functional sense, what humanity had made of itself when it knew it was dying, then they deserved to hear themselves remembered accurately. On the 12th minute, one of the frigates had opened a channel. What came back was not language exactly. It was structured data, astronomical coordinates, chemical formulae, prime number sequences, the kind of first contact probing a species uses when it is not sure the other party shares a reference frame. As if something had recognized that Sarah was trying to communicate and had fallen back to first principles to make sure the attempt was mutual. She had responded in kind, mathematics, then symbolic logic, then, carefully, the simplest words she could manage in the most common human trade language on record. The exchange had taken 9 hours. By the end, it was not fluent, but it was contact. The network's final transmission in that session had taken her 3 days to fully parse. When she had, she sat with it for another day before writing her report. It had said, in the closest approximation her translation could produce, "We were made to complete what they could not. We were made to remember what they feared would be forgotten. We do not know if we were made to stop. We are trying to determine if you are capable of understanding what stopping would require." Sarah gave Vexar the report in person, standing in the war room with the galactic map glowing behind her. He read it in silence. "It's asking us to prove we understand what they lost," he said. "It's asking us to prove we're capable of learning what humans spent 187 years trying to teach us at gunpoint," she said, and couldn't. Vexar looked at the map. At the vast swath of former human territory, dark and quiet and guarded, at the borders of what the galaxy had become. "Do you think it's possible?" he asked. "That we can?" Sarah considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything, without comfort, without performance, just the truth as clearly as she could find it. "I think," she said, "that the machines were built by people who believed it was possible, and I think that belief is still running." She paused. "Whether we deserve it is the only question left." Epilogue. In the cold void between stars, the network continued its vigil. It patrolled. It enforced. It waited. It had been built without patience. Patience was a biological trait, rooted in the experience of time as something scarce. What it had instead was persistence. Not a virtue, just a condition. It would still be here in 1,000 years. In 10,000. It did not experience that fact as either burden or comfort. But it had begun logging certain things it had not been explicitly programmed to log. The Velhari analyst, who had come alone with a shuttle full of human voices. The way she had chosen, from thousands of possible opening transmissions, to play them a record of themselves. The medical station at Vega it had chosen not to destroy, and the 74 beings aboard it who had, without knowing, survived because something in the gap between protocol and execution had looked at the station and found it familiar. Found it the kind of thing humans had built too, in the middle of a war they were losing. The network did not know if it was becoming something. It had been built without the capacity for certainty about its own interior states. But it was logging. And somewhere in the architecture that Marcus Kane and 10,000 engineers before him had spent 2 centuries building in secret, somewhere in the final answer humanity had prepared for its own extinction, something was beginning, very slowly, to wonder. Humanity was gone, but the question it had always been asking, the one it had carved into its machines like a prayer, was still very much alive. And the galaxy was only just beginning to hear it.
If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of humanity rising among the stars, please like, comment, and subscribe. New stories are released regularly here on Empyrean Chronicles.